You're listening to Power Athlete Radio, a podcast dedicated to empowering your performance every damn day. Join former NFL pro and Power Athlete founder John Welborn as he dissects the greatest minds in strength, conditioning, and more. So whether your goal is to be the hammer, destroy mediocrity, or simply move the dirt, you've come to the right place. Now with the warm-up done, let the gains begin.
Hey, Power Athlete Nation. We're bringing back one of the tried and true favorites of Power Athlete Radio, Mr. Rafael Ruiz. If you've been living under a rock and do not know who Rafael is, well, I'm going to make an incredible introduction. Rafael Ruiz has the distinction of having trained me for the majority of my NFL career. He was the guy that I entrusted to train me through my journey as an NFL player. And then when I retired from the NFL, when I started CrossFit Football, he was the first number I called to come on and help me develop the CrossFit Football seminar. Rafael Ruiz is based out of Tampa, Florida, and has trained some of the top athletes in Major League Baseball, the NFL, and the Olympics. He has a breadth of knowledge that is anything short of amazing, not only on the educational level, the technical level, but also in terms of coaching and developing athletes and really allowing people to become better versions of themselves. And I say this because he was able to do that for me. So I want you to buckle in and prepare for one of the better podcasts that we've done in recent time, Mr. Rafael Ruiz.
Welcome to Power Athlete Radio. Longtime friend of the podcast and Power Athlete, Rafael Ruiz. Coach, welcome back to the show.
Fantastic having you guys. I always love cutting it up and talking shop with you guys. It's always a great time. So I appreciate you giving us an opportunity to share some knowledge.
And we're talking all things. We're talking strength kills, speed thrills, and how coordination is king.
Sounds amazing. 100%. Let's dive in. So at the 2022 symposium, Mr. Ruiz came out and gave an incredible presentation on sprinting mechanics and, more importantly, how to develop speed in your athletes.
And how we broke this up, it was into 3 phases. And the beauty, Raph, and this takes back to CrossFit Football days with the warm-ups, right? It was your opportunity to teach as well as assess your athletes. So we had a 3-part series for you to put your skills on display that began with a sprint warm-up so you could see the coaches that you're working with and athletes. Then you laid the foundation with an awesome presentation, and then it was time to go fast. And we took them out to an old middle school track and just let the beast unleash. So that was the gist, man. So I want to explore that opportunity, explore that presentation style, beginning with that assessment. So how important is assessing speed for a coach rather than just go in and try to throw your system at an athlete?
Well, number one, I think over the years I've learned that what you find with really good coaches and watching really good coaches is trying to figure out what the athlete currently does. As a young coach, you want to take everything that you know and immediately force it down their throat. And what you find is either an athlete isn't ready to receive that information, or you're going to fight a battle that you're not going to win because there's so much discrepancy between where you want the athlete to be. And that could be a long-term goal in terms of a year, 2 years. A high school coach may bring in a freshman and try to completely stomp them into submission, or her. But in the end, if you look at a 4-year program, what do I want my athlete to look like when they leave? Well, maybe it requires a little bit more skill in terms of, let's see what you're doing, because maybe the front door isn't the best route. Maybe it's that side window, because you can figure out, okay, this is what you do. And instead of saying black is white, white is black, you can say, hey, you know what? Keep doing that, and let's just adjust it a little bit. Let's shift it and get it a little closer to what the end goal is, versus immediately telling somebody that what they're doing is wrong. And so planting those seeds, allowing them to start to think about that. And sometimes that's all it takes, is saying, hey, listen, pull your toes up. And maybe they've never learned that. Maybe they've had a coach or a parent say, a common prevalence is sprinters run on their toes. And so somebody who's not in the know as much about the kinesiology about it will have their son or daughter or their young athletes running around on their tiptoes when in fact that's not really what we want them to see. And so maybe you get into a situation where if you just take a step back and take that big 30,000 foot view and try to figure out what they're doing and then work from there.
And what do you say to athletes that accepted what they were told? You're not fast, or I'm not fast, and start to compare themselves to those very God-gifted athletes. Do you believe that an athlete can get faster?
Oh, wholeheartedly. The first thing that we always start off with is you don't have to be the fastest. Just like you don't have to be the strongest, you don't have to be the most limber, but any of those athletic fitness variables, you should fight to not be the worst. You can always improve. So we kind of joke around in our facility as we always say ER. So you can always get faster. You can always get stronger. You can always get more mobile. All of these things can be improved upon. If you look at the way that speed is developed, yes, there are these genetic anomalies that have the great wiring and the great muscle composition to be fast. But if you look, the majority of things that we can fix can be accomplished in the weight room. Poor posture is the number one thing. If I can fix somebody's poor posture, then they can express their strength better. They can express their power better. A lot of guys will go out there and say, okay, strength and conditioning, let's get strong. Well, strong is in a vacuum that says I can get really strong with the bar on my back in this perfect squared stance. Well, the moment that your body starts moving outside of that perfect position, then your body can't fully express the strength that you want it to express. And so to basically lead off of what you guys were talking about early is as I'm going through all of this, I want to be able to put my athletes in the best position to be adjustable. And for us, adjustability is the marker of athleticism. Is okay, this is a perfect squat. Now all of a sudden a perfect squat might change according to the foot position that I'm in. I don't always have an opportunity to jump up for that fly ball by setting my feet and perfectly taking a breath in and bracing and getting my hands back. It's just got to be one of those instinctual things, and the adjustment allows for that. So can an athlete get better? Absolutely, if we can work on their ability to improve their posture and then the positions that we are trying to get them in. So teaching a position and then challenging their body's ability to get back to that position or get back to that position. And that really determines whether or not somebody's responsive enough to develop that speed.
Can you speak to what breaking down and creating a warm-up? So it's not just getting your chili hot. It's not basic. It's not a routine. Speak to your focus on preparation for what's coming next, whether it's speed or strength.
First and foremost, we go with mindset. Mindset is always number one for us. So the very first thing we talk about is, can I start to plant the seeds of the emotional cues that we're going to use throughout that series? So whatever the psychomotor driver is, back in the day when we first started doing a ton of speed work and getting guys ready for the combine, we paralyzed people. We created such a robot of so many coaching cues that, okay, arms this and punch and hammer and 90 degrees and chin tucked in. And well, what we ended up having was a bunch of guys who just overthink everything. Overthought it.
Overthink, like drank.
Yeah.
Purple drank.
We had some people that just thought too much. And so we immediately made a change and said, we're going to take these coaching cues, but we're going to boil them down to hopefully a psychomotor driver, just one or two, a phrase, a cue word that really accentuates what they're doing. And so what we would do within the training, as they started to get it, we would put a word with that. Or oftentimes the athlete would put a word. Oh, I feel like this. Bam, there's your cue word. And so all I want you to do is think of dive and drive or clear blocks or whatever it is. And if I can plant that seed throughout, then all of a sudden I have an athlete who is constantly taking what they're learning from the generalized angles to now the full motion, to plugging that and creating that synergy between, this is a psychomotor driver, this is what it should look like, this is a psychomotor driver, this is what it should feel like. And so planting that seed. Then from there, I have to figure out what exactly I'm focusing in on. So if we're focusing on arm swing, so now all of a sudden we're going to do something to stretch something that removes somebody's inability to get in the right position from a postural standpoint. And then we're going to carry that theme throughout. Then the second part is we want to go ahead and work on the positioning that posture affords. And so from a posture and a positioning standpoint, and then always plugging and playing that psychomotor driver back into it. And so that way, hopefully over time, and again, even though we did that presentation in the course of a weekend, I'm looking at over the course of months and over the course of a year and over the course of years and years and years, that at some point in time, I want them to constantly, continuously hear that in their head over and over and over again.
And your athlete ASAP, so that stands for Accentuated Skill Acquisition Programming. But with
Yes.
that perspective, it's not force feeding and you're not getting mad at the athletes for the time that it takes them to acquire these skills.
Oh, 100%. And John, you can attest to this. It's and I don't mean to demean this in any way to any app. Yeah, but this is fatherhood. This is being a parent. And so as I constantly find myself telling my kids the same thing, do I get frustrated? Absolutely. Do I get mad? Absolutely. Do I raise my voice when I shouldn't? Absolutely. But I always have to come back to when my children are down the road, are they going to make that decision for themselves? And if I don't, then if I don't constantly remind them, if I don't kind of lead them into making those decisions on their own, then that's where the problem lies. So as I go through, I would recommend to all coaches is have that big picture in mind, because it keeps you from getting excessively frustrated. I find that I get frustrated more when the athletes don't care. Yeah. As opposed to if they care and they're trying, then I will never get mad. I'll never get upset. It's when they start drifting, and especially when their body language shows that they don't care that what I'm teaching them.
So I run into this with my own kids. Are you having a good time? Like, take Cash to baseball and the smiles on his face. Last night driving home from jiu-jitsu with Jamie, always ask her like, hey, what'd you work on today? How'd it go? And it was just like, meh. And everything was just so down in the mouth. And I'm like, are you not having fun? Because at some point, training for sport, obviously you can't just do it because it's fun. I mean, at some point it kind of switches over and you get into this like, hey, this is the routine. This is what I'm doing. Like I hate talking to people about motivation, because I think motivation is so fleeting. I think repetition and routine, and this is just what we do, becomes so important. And as I'm listening to this, it really comes down to, okay, like these are the set movements that we're going to learn. And you were really good. And I remember when we first started training, it was a lot of information at once. And I remember thinking like overwhelmed, but then realizing that as long as I mastered one thing we discussed each day, I knew that I was moving towards this, display of mastery. And I took the same approach with football. As I'm talking to Jamie last night, I'm like, what's one thing you learned? I don't know. I'm not good at this. I don't like to do it. And I realized at that age, there's a direct correlation between like fun. Am I getting good at this? Like, am I good at it? Am I having fun? Not like, oh, it's really fun, but I suck, because they can't like delineate. And I'm sure you see this with your own kids. Like, but if they're not smiling and it's not a good time, I know that we either got to go in a different direction, try something new, or kind of pivot in different ways. But I know with training athletes, and we've seen this over and over again, people get extremely frustrated, and it's like, focus on one thing. And I know back in the early days, it was like a vomiting of cues. And we saw this teaching CrossFit football. These people were coming to us, not as athletes, as coaches, trying to learn a skill that they had been never exposed to. And I think when we started there, we had an inherent frustration because they were athletes, never realizing that they had no formal training in what we were teaching them, and it was so foreign. I mean, we might as well have been teaching them a foreign language and then getting mad when they don't understand conversational, whatever, in the first 5 minutes. So I think being able to look at that audience, take a step back, put a slower progression together, and then really just manage the expectation of, I just need you to master one thing we're doing here. Whether it be arm spring, toe up, knee up, and then also you have to break a lot of misconceptions like you were talking about, like sprint on your toes. I don't even know where that ever came from.
Well, I think a lot of it came from is if you don't have a keen eye and you watch a sprinter and how fast and dynamic that ankle is, it gives the appearance. You talk about the difference between a good coach and a great coach. Great coaches have amazing eyes. And everybody always asks me, what do you think the key to being a good coach? And I will tell you first off is the eyes. Amazing coaches have good eyes. They can pick up on things. So in Rader's journey through this baseball infielding thing, he's gone through a lot of coaches, and everybody has amazing drills. In the day and age of internet, there are so many drills out there, and people have gone out of their way to develop these drills, and they're great. And he goes to this guy, Coach Johnny Rodriguez, who within the first 2 minutes picks up on three. He goes, we got to fix this, and this. And nobody, after a dozen coaches have gone to him and touting how good he is and his potential. And so this coach took 2 minutes to immediately point out three major flaws. And he goes, here, watch this. And then he would do it. And I go, oh my God, I didn't even see that. And he picked up on those. And the point is, every really good coach has an innate ability to focus on the low-hanging fruit, as well as to almost slow things down because of their ability to focus. So watching somebody sprint at high speed without any slow motion cameras, you really have the idea that they're running on the tips of their toes because they're so springy and bouncy. But in fact, it's just a very, very dramatic, very short amount of time that they're going midfoot and extension, midfoot and extension, midfoot extension of the ankle.
Wow.
So
go ahead.
But that's how it ends up happening. And so now all of a sudden it just bleeds down with what we talked about earlier, where everybody else, and it gets reverberated on that TikTok manifestation of coaching where, oh, look, he's running on his toes. And now everybody rinses and repeats that same coaching cue. And now we don't know how to fix it.
Yes, I want to stick with sprinting while we're here and then come back to skill acquisition. But speak to Gambetta. So the positioning, the arm action, the leg action, and your take on that and what you've helped add to that that's brought into your sprinting coaching.
Well, years ago when we first started doing this, Vern was out there and he kind of systematized and pioneered a lot of sprint training with his PAL system. And I found over the years through every fad and everything that's come around is posture, arms, and legs, for the most part, has been the gold standard. What a lot of people forget, especially in this day and age, is we run into the trap of watching one guy run really well, just like we did, John, with Carl Lewis. And it's like, wow.
Or Michael Johnson.
Or Michael Johnson. Yeah. And so when Michael came around, everybody immediately switched and started to evolve into his running style.
Yeah.
And what we forgot is that PAL system is everybody's built differently. Yeah. So my arm swing is going to be different than yours, Chris, than different than John's because of the anatomical differences. Like if you look at Raider running, he is that, and John, you'll attest to this, as you've seen a lot of high level athletes where he has that really high waist. Like he is like short torso, but his pelvis is like right up underneath his nipples. And so he's one of those guys, he'll squat all the way. He's got that Filipino rice picker squat in him, but he'll never be able to touch his toes. Like he's never been able to touch his toes because the way he anatomically is built. So if I were to take him and drive him into a cookie cutter of saying you have athletes, you have coaches that'll say to the cheek and then only come to the hip bone. Well, an athlete like Raider will miss a huge amount of extension off the back end because his legs are so long. And so he'll end up running kind of like that prancing style versus being fluid and powerful. Versus somebody who has shorter legs, then maybe you need to do that and just take advantage of the fact that you've got shorter legs, and then you want to take advantage of that quicker rate. So his system really says amazing posture, use your arms to drive your legs, however your legs are built, but use that as a tool. So again, coming back to Raider, to come out of the hole on his start, I teach him, punch your hands a little bit faster, come in a little bit tighter, move them a little faster because your legs are long naturally. Let's get a faster rate. But once you get up into top end speed, go ahead and let those hands come past your butt so you can start to open up that stride. So posture, arm action or drive leg action, and then making sure that nothing is hindering the leg action. And what we've normally found is mobility causes more problems than lack of strength when it comes to leg action. So excessive internal or external rotation, knock knee or valgus or varus stress, or does somebody have discrepancy in the ankles? Are their hamstrings too tight? Are their hip flexors too tight? Rarely have we ever found, hey, you can't run fast because you're not strong enough. Yeah. Getting strong is great because it's going to add to that, but we want to make sure that the tires are aligned on the car.
One of the things we're running into a lot more, I find that lack of dorsiflexion being almost a bigger issue than hamstring flexibility. So years ago, I thought that hamstring flexibility, especially in sprinting, was the gold standard. Now, I mean, through using the dead bug, I realized that like ankle flexibility and more importantly, dorsiflexion seems to be a lot of limiting factors, because I've seen people with good dorsiflexion that have tight, let's say posterior chains, hamstrings, all of a sudden be able to get into a much better position than people that have good dorsiflexion and tight hamstrings.
100%. I mean, we talk about, in our system, we call it contact strength. And so somebody's inability to place their foot in the right position because of whether it's discrepancies in the toes or the ankle will negatively affect how they can express their strength. So it doesn't matter how strong somebody's hamstrings are. That peripheral effect, I always say that the body is only going to recruit what the body can handle. And so, yeah, you could have these huge giant, it was always a pet peeve of mine. We could talk about this later, but how many times somebody tore a hamstring and the first thing that was mentioned, oh, your hamstrings aren't strong enough, let's go strengthen those. Yeah. And I've seen some of the biggest, strongest, most amazingly gifted athletes with thick hamstrings tear them. And I'm like, are you telling me that you think that guy's hamstrings weren't strong? And that's not the case. You're asking that hamstring to do too much. Yeah. So if we can get the ankle in the right position, if we can get the foot in the right position, being in the new baseball world, if I can get the wrist and the hand position in the most efficient position, now all of a sudden it takes stress off of the shoulder and the elbow, where we're not getting a lot of those UCL problems. It's just amazing to me that it's so quick to say that if something gets injured or it's not performing the way we want it to, that it's a weakness.
Well, usually it's the strong side that gets injured by making up for the weak side. So, I mean, but I'll tell you, this dorsiflexion thing is becoming more and more of an issue we run into. And I don't know where, it feels like it's growing.
Oh, man, it was very prevalent when we were teaching seminars as well.
Yeah, it was, but yeah, maybe it's population. We saw such a massive cross-section, just like this homogenous culture where we were traveling. But we were also in the CrossFit deal, which, toes out, a lot of cheat arounds, a lot of workarounds, really focusing not on shin angle and position, but more just an arbitrary, like you have to squat below parallel, whatever it looks like. And then we saw a lot of backgrounding. Rob, I always thought there was a big correlation, especially in hamstring injuries, with the ability to maintain trunk stability. So, I found if if you got pretty good dorsiflexion and pretty good arranging of this area, everything else just kind of seems to be a non-negotiable, or I mean a non-factor rather.
Oh yeah, that's low-hanging fruit. I mean, that's really, if you can fix those two things, you can make immediate improvements in somebody's speed. I mean, we've used this since the CrossFit football days was the wet noodle model. If you can't transfer force, everybody forgets that as you get stronger, it's all reliant on your ability to push down and back. And if there is a kink in the hose, if there's a link out of place, now all of a sudden I can't displace force down and back as much as I would want to. And thus you're going to have somebody who, in your famous words, looks like Tarzan, plays like Jane.
Yeah.
And so you have an athlete who may look the part, you may look like a superhero, but why aren't you fast? Why can't you take that weight room into the field or onto the field?
Well, and we ran into it constantly across the football. The amount of people that, are obviously training, they look like $1 million, but then all of a sudden you put them into a speed model with something that requires maximal dynamic sprinting and maximal effort, and all of a sudden fucking tires come off. And they were always like, oh, am I not squatting enough? Am I not doing this? I need to do mobility. I'm like, you probably need to understand the dynamic nature of squatting, of sprinting, and the fact that the only way you get good at sprinting, and especially develop because there's no way to replicate it in the weight room. I mean, we talk about, strengthening posture and position and all these other things, but at some point you have to go out and actually sprint. And you have to run in an intensity that puts you into this, plus 90% so that you can actually handle the forces. I mean, what was it, 300 pounds per square inch? There's no way to mimic that in the weight room.
No, the speed. That's really it. It's the speed of it. It's the amount of ground, the amount of force in sprinting. It's 0.02 of a second. So the amount of force that you're producing that happens in literally a blink of an eye, you just can't replicate it anywhere. That's why it's called the world's greatest exercise, is sprinting. Everybody always asks me if I could do one exercise, sprint. No. Wait, what I want to do, sprint. Sprinting is literally the answer to 99.9% of all your problems out there. Is and to clarify, it's working up to eventually getting to a point where you're running at top end speed, whatever that is for you. So if you're fast, running at top end speed fast. If you're not as fast, then running at top end speed not as fast. But the goal isn't what I consider jogging. A lot of people go, oh, I jog, oh, I run. No, you don't. I'm talking about like if a bear was chasing you kind of thing. Like, are you going to go out there and run full speed and get after it? So that's the big difference.
I've heard you speak on 2 times that athletes are most willing to learn. And it was cool at the seminar to see, number one, when they fail. Unfortunately, we did run into a couple injuries, but as these 2 moments, the most willingness for an athlete to pay attention to your coaching. So as that applies to speed, sometimes with speed you can't necessarily feel failure. So how important is tracking times and then coming back to those initial warm-up movements, if you will, to help put them in a position to then feel where that limited speed is?
Oh, that's huge. That's huge. I would say as a baseline, that's why it's one of the easiest things to track is just pure out speed. I would also cross-reference that with stride length and stride frequency so that you have a very good model of what to follow. And then if you want to go more in depth is to figure out what the distance that they're covering their first 6 steps, and then doing a 30-yard or 30-meter, whatever you have access to. So as they get into that top end speed, if you're not dealing with a track athlete, dealing specifically with their sprint sport. But I'll tell you that is huge to be able to record those and then to constantly revisit of how they're applying that and through as many different angles as possible. So encouraging coaches and athletes to film their athletes from a frontal view, from a side view, from a 45-degree front, so that 45-degree from the true side position, as well as dead on, because you can make dramatic improvements just off of that, of just how they are, again, posture and positioning. The moment you stop and start freeze framing, it gives an athlete the opportunity to take what in essence is misery, a dead bug, and you're going, wow, you suck at this. I don't like to do it. It's miserable. It's exposing me to my weaknesses. And especially higher level athletes who don't like to be challenged like that. Um, Sadly, we run into that more often than not. Everybody talks about, and again, this isn't a disrespect because I love Kobe and I love what he's done for the mentality of sports preparation. But there aren't a lot of guys like that. There's just not a lot of guys who are willing to say, "Hey, coach me up. Hey, take a look at what I'm doing and tell me if I'm doing." Out of 1,000 athletes, I'll find a handful that are willing to do that. The majority of athletes, the moment you start to pull back on the reins, the moment you start to say, "Hey, I'm going to ask you to do something that you're going to suck at," they're not going to want to do it, and when they don't want to do it, the quality and the attitude that comes along with that not wanting to do it will significantly impair their results. And so by getting them into a frame of mind where they can see the results, where they can say, "Hey, take a look at this. Your left foot is slightly turned out." Now, what that's amounting to is a galloping effect. So if you notice, if we can turn this in, you can probably gain about a half inch per step off of your left foot, meaning off of a 12 steps, 22 steps for your 40, you would end up getting there roughly 2 feet closer. And so that's just off of fixing that alignment. Now, all of a sudden, you have an athlete who is more responsive to that. Now, all of a sudden, you can approach it from twofolds, depending on who the athlete is. From a positive performance standpoint, I can say, "Hey, you can get there faster," whether it's the 40-yard dash, whether it's millions of dollars are at stake at your NFL combine, or whether you use past performances on the field as an indicator of whether or not they're going to be more responsive to listen. So, hey, remember last year where you got caught on the goal line? Remember last year in that game that we lost where you missed the tackle by fractions of an inch? Well, all of that could be accomplished by fixing this. And all of a sudden you've got that. And then the other aspect is injuries. Then you start to say, "Hey, what is it?" Because most people won't put two and two together. Most younger athletes, they go, "Okay, so what? My toe's out." Well, now all of a sudden you start to say, "Okay, this starts to turn out." Now all of a sudden we're starting to lose a little bit of the inside head of the hamstring. We're starting to put the groin at a little bit more risk of or predisposed for injuries. And so now you start to put those things in line of saying, maybe you get lucky, you throw that needle in the haystack and he goes, "Wow, you know what? My groin does get a little sore." Or, the inside of my knee starts to bother me by the end of practice. Well, those are little things that you can allow the athlete to start to put the pieces of the puzzle together. And now they're more responsive to listen to what you have to say in terms of those correctives.
Show, don't tell.
Yeah.
Go back to, I think this story is very valuable, John. Your first experience with Raph, where you had nothing but a couple rubber bands and a PVC pipe. Show you
just to take you back memory lane. I was a young NFL player living in Tampa. I called my agent, asked him for some recommendations on where to train. He plugs me in with this guy, Rafael Ruiz. I show up to University of Tampa to their track stadium to meet this guy that I had no idea who he was. I just knew he was training a bunch of professional baseball players, or that's what I was told. So I show up, where's the weight room? And Raph's like, this is early in the off season too. So I wasn't necessarily, ready to jump into, weights or training in that. So it was really just more about some, GPP conditioning. We'd always done GPP blocks. So I understood that piece. And we went out there the first day, and I think there was hurdles, PVC, and a bunch of bands. And when I tell you, and I use this word with the term of endearment, when I got broke the fuck off. I just come off playing 16 games, in a playoff game, and had benched 500 plus pounds for reps, and was considered very strong and in good shape, and that was my deal. Conditioning, I was never going to be out of shape, and to go out there and get smashed like I did, I just remember thinking, if I can master this and attain the level of flexibility, strength, and control that it would take to be able to do this well, like, what more could I do on the field? But I also was already really strong. So, I mean, that wasn't something that I was going there where I had these strength deficits or I had these other issues. I was strong. I was already, 300 plus pounds. I was already in pretty decent shape. So, I mean, I had a lot of the intangibles, the flexibility, the conditioning, and really just this alternate training system just kind of hit me at the right point. And I think that there was a deficit that needed to be made up. And once we, figured it out in that piece, then we actually went back and started rebuilding everything. But, I also always subscribe to a lot of like non-traditional type stuff. I wonder if other people had shown up there and been like, what do you mean there's no weight room today? Like, what do you mean we're not doing this? And the other thing that Raph ran into quite often is a lot of guys did not want to work that hard. So I've always figured out that like success is on the road of hard work. Like there's this big sign like Hollywood that says success, and I'm traveling there. Like every sign is like laden with hard work. Every time you pull off, there's something hard to do. Like the path to success leads with hard work. I don't know. I've never found the super highway to success that was like easy street. Like, let me just put my head back. So, I go into something, and I think that's kind of why I got tricked early in the CrossFit deal. So I went to CrossFit. It was hard. It was hard work. I saw people working hard. I figured like, oh, maybe this ramping up of GPP and building a larger platform will allow everything else to be better. But that actually failed miserably when I realized that the platform of which life is built on is strength, not general capacity. So conditioning is an element, whereas strength is the platform. So that was just the fact that, we had done a ton of metabolic conditioning in college doing the Nebraska circuits with Todd Rice. We had done a ton of dynamic sprinting and movement. And when I went to go see Raph, it was very similar to what we had done in college. Not similar, but the effect and what he was asking us to do was very similar to what I did in college, and then also within track. And it was just kind of a interesting medley. But, I remember a lot of guys came and went within the years that I trained with Rafael, and the one deciding factor for whether or not somebody stayed and was sticky was if they were already strong. If you showed up and you were pretty strong, Raph could do it. But if you were in such a strength deficit, because there were a lot of guys that weren't strong, and they found it very difficult to execute a lot of the movements and be competitive. So and Raph talked about it earlier in this podcast, that like, if you're pretty strong, we can work with you. If I got to like try to develop this in concert with strength, now we run into a lot of issues. Like, training the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu kids. They're incredible Jiu-Jitsu players. They're able to do a lot of different things. Their deficit was that they weren't strong. So now all of a sudden we give them strength. If I was trying to develop strength and Jiu-Jitsu skill at the same time, I don't know if we could have developed those in concert. And I wonder if they were already strong before they learned Jiu-Jitsu, if they would have had to develop their skills in such a way and understand angles and all the other kind of like body positioning stuff. I think because they weren't strong, they learned how to do it efficiently and make up for these deficits. Now that we've given them strength and mobility and all the other key factors, now we're getting to see them do very, very well.
Oh, that's huge. I would say that the thing that made your journey, part of what made your journey special, is the fact that you trained like a little guy. Meaning, I'll use Raider as an example again. Raider's learning how to play the game of baseball as a stick bug. So he has to get everything perfect. He's got to get the perfect bat path. He's got to get the perfect swing and the perfect timing, because there's some kids his age that are hitting absolute bombs, and they are huge, massive children. I mean, they are out there at 6 foot, 175-pound 12-year-olds that are hitting 200, 300-foot home runs. And so now you take a kid like Raider, which God bless, he's taken after his mother, and he's going to be tall, but that's going to happen over time.
Yeah.
So right now he has to learn to play the game as somebody who doesn't have any gifts. And so he's got to work on internal and external rotation of the femur. He's got to work on all of these tiny little muscles, all of these scapular depression, and all of these things that are helping put the pieces of the puzzle together, which what I tell Raider all the time is, I can't wait till you go through puberty and you start putting on those big man muscles, and it's just going to be gross because you're doing all the right steps of laying down every piece of the puzzle, and eventually it's going to come together. But right now you're training and preparing as if you are a tiny guy trying to live in a big man's world. And just like you said, it's forcing him to learn better technique. It's forcing him to cross his T's and dot his I's and all of those tiny little pieces, so that one day when it all comes together, he's going to make himself a pretty good, pretty decent ball player.
Yeah. Well, you were laughing. I was laughing. You talking about his legs are long and his torso is short. It's because his, the torso is the last thing to grow. When you're a baby, the torso is long, the legs are short, so that when babies fall down, they don't have very far to go. That's why their legs are so short. And then the first thing that happens is the legs grow, and then the torso is small, and then all of a sudden the torso starts to grow, and then all of a sudden they start kind of balancing out a little bit. So he's probably in that, but you're 100% right. This is why I think a lot of people struggled with Olympic lifting early on, because they were already pretty strong before they learned Olympic lifting. It's a lot easier to take a kid who's not strong, teach them the technique, and then as they get stronger, the skill develops. And I know I talked to Dave Spitz recently about it. He's like, one of the hardest things we ran is that we didn't have a child development program for Olympic weightlifting. So we had to go find pretty talented athletes and then try to teach them Olympic weightlifting, which is ass backwards to how you're supposed to do it. Uh-huh. You're supposed to use it as an athletic development tool with kids that aren't very strong. And then as they get bigger and stronger, all of a sudden the bar just starts adding weight. And just talking with him about some athletic development and some of the things that they want to do. But you see Travis Mash is another one. He's got these kids that are, clean and jerking 400 pounds at 16 and 17. A big thing he reaches out is he looks for football players that are pretty athletic that want to go get scholarships, and then he teaches them to Olympic weightlift well.
That are not necessarily football skill for scholarship.
Yeah. Yeah, but he found that, if you can clean and jerk 400 pounds, all of a sudden playing football looks pretty easy. So
also true.
Yeah.
Well, John, you mentioned you were strong. And then, Raph, you mentioned earlier contact strength. And there's a term that I want to pull in from my experience working with you, transitional strength. So can you speak to the difference between the barbell strong and then the value that you've seen and apply to your athletes with creating and generating transitional strength, which eventually leads to that expression, dynamic contact strength, and just being awesome on the field through space?
So one of the things we found, and I'll use you as an example, John, was lunging. The ability to you take somebody who was gorilla strong, and then when you take them and say, okay, we're going to try to do a lunge, we're going to do a walking lunge, and then to see the disparity between how much you are capable of putting a bar on your back, and then to have to take that step back and go, wow, let's work on your ability to transition from high to low, from both legs to single leg to the other single leg. And it taught us a lot as we worked through the years of that's where the discrepancy lies between somebody who is amazingly gifted in the weight room versus somebody who, this is where I am in the weight room, this is our transitional strength, and this is their ability to acquire skills. And what we found is, I forgot the term that you just used, but it's really those compensations. Yeah. And so the more gifted you are, you can compensate, especially to tally off of what we just talked about, is you can be really strong and you can compensate with strength and get away with it. If you just put your big old strong gorilla paws on somebody, you can muscle them around pretty good and not have great footwork. You could have decent footwork, but you don't have to have great footwork. But if you get somebody to have great footwork and couple that with their natural strength, now you've got somebody with that transitional strength that gets really, really scary. That's where you get the really talented, gifted guys out there who are what I always say is overachieving. So strong guys will always achieve, but we're in the business of helping people overachieve. So transitional strength for us is defined as somebody's ability to work that gyroscopic action of, can you move from X to Y, Y to Z, Z to X, in any combination of the two of the three, And then it gets really scary because now you start to blend it together. The way we always look at it is teaching the ABCs. And so what we try to teach our athletes is, listen, the exercises, the basic exercises you do in a weight room are just teaching ABCs. But then we have to figure out how can we start to put the letters together to create words. And how can we create words and put those words together to create more fluid words into more fluid sentences, into more fluid paragraphs. And hopefully when you get really, really talented people, then you can start to get into the beautiful arts of singing. And when you learn to play a musical instrument, all the notes are the same. It's the exact same one. It's how masterful you can be with those same notes that I have, that you have, that John has, that anybody else has. But it's the people who are very talented, gifted. And again, to taper off of that is, how hard are you willing to work to develop that mastery? And so the transitional strength is what we always use as a clear indication of somebody's developing athleticism, to take the weight room into skill acquisition, arena specific skill acquisition, not just the skill of running, not just the skill of jumping and things like that.
I could not lunge when we started. I think I've told you this. The first day we went in, I had a 600-pound back squat. All of a sudden I go to lunge, and I could like lunge and then squat. But the practice of actually lunging and then like moving over my toe and driving the back knee into another lunge was a skill I did not have. And it was one of those like weird realizations where you're like, I can't do this. And I remember Raph being like, you can't do it today, but imagine how much better you'll be after we master this piece. And that's where we came into like, no wedding step and drunk steps and all the other positions, 30-degree lunges, 45, all the other different pieces. It was one of those like huge, like eye-opening moments where you're like, wow, I can't stand on one leg and transition into the other. And, you think about football. We start every play on 2 feet, but then you're never on 2 feet. You're punching and sliding. You're always moving through space. And to not have the strength to stand on one leg and then transition and move forward, it made me realize I was probably using a lot of lean and gravity in terms of sprinting, but moving through space in that. So it was interesting in terms of the X, Y, and Z axis, being like, well, I can bilateral hip hinge in this X really well. I can deadlift. I can do all these things. Now, all of a sudden, when I get into the Y and the Z, now here's a huge, is it a strength deficit, a movement deficit, maybe a neurological deficit? Why can't I do these movements well? I'm already strong, right? And then you realize, like, yeah, you're strong in this plane of motion or this axis of rotation, but you're not strong in this one or this one, but yet you need all three to be able to demonstrate athleticism. So that was a huge piece for me. And, whereas a lot of athletes would have been like, well, this is stupid, I can't do it. I took the other approach of, if I can't do this, then imagine how much better I'll be when I do this. And I don't know why, I run into this with athletes constantly, where all of a sudden they're not good at something or they can't execute something. And then, obviously something's broken with the movement if I can't do it. And the movement's the movement, it's fixed. Your ability to do something has little to do with emotion and quotient. It has the fact that you can't move your body here, but imagine how much better you be when you are able to do this.
Well, quoting Ruiz here, difference between, I know you said this earlier, difference between a good and a great coach. Great coach has the ability to manage that emotional response for the athlete.
A lot of professional athletes and even kids, there's so much ego. I run into this with my own. I wonder if there's an age where ego becomes an issue. Like Cash just turned 7, and we're at baseball, and he loves to hit. He'll be in there like we had BP the other day, and the coach was like, I can't throw any more pitches, and he's like, just 5 more. And he hung out after, waiting for the coach. He's like, well, I'm going to let his shoulder rest. And so we hung out and waited, and then finally the coach is like, I'm not throwing anymore. Cash is like, just 1 more. And so he threw him 1 more, and the dude was just throwing grapefruits. And, and even if I think he missed the last pitch, and it wasn't like, oh, I'm going to end on it. He's like, oh, that was a blast. And there was no ego about it. He just likes to hit. He has like a few different, like I got him a longer bat and a shorter bat. And so he just tries different ones. And he's like, oh, I hit farther with this one and this, and just having fun. Whereas there all of a sudden becomes an age. And I think it's like a realization somewhere where maybe around 10 or 11, where now all of a sudden people are watching me and I might look stupid. And, you know, he doesn't care that he misses and it's his age. But then all of a sudden I'm taking Jamie to jits and, you know, I'm watching her and she's like more worried about what I'm judging on her. Then I'm thinking, maybe is that a girl thing or a boy thing? And
It's both.
Yeah.
It's both. As they start to develop that self-awareness, they're going from fun to being very cognizant of that evaluation that others are having. To circle back around, that talks very cleanly to what you were talking about, Chris. And a good coach, just like a good parent, will always try to find something to praise. So as you're going through, I always try to go out of my way to figure out, hey, that's a great, and even it may not be something that I'm really trying to dial into, but if it looks good, I'll use that as a key, as a cue to say, hey, great job. Oh, wow, you're doing really good with your shoulder blades back. That's fantastic. And then the moment you do that, you can start to say, hey, alongside with those shoulders being pulled back, let's try to pull those toes up. And that next thing you know, you're just going to build success on success, something that they may not even know about, something that they're doing that you can be, wow, you know what, you're doing a great job with that. I like how you're doing this. Awesome job with that. And so one of the things that we found working with our child psychology program is at this age, at that 9, 10, 11, 12-year-old ages, making sure that the games are a celebration. And so one of the things that we teach the other coaches and the other parents is at the games, you are absolutely unequivocally not allowed to negatively criticize. The only thing you're allowed to do is find something that your kid is doing well and scream it at the top of your lungs, no matter what, because one of the things that we found, and you're going to see the more that Cash keeps playing baseball, is a lot of parents will treat little league and travel ball like a pro game.
Oh, we're already there. He's in. He was young, so there's kids that are 8 because it's first grade. So there's kids that are 7, 8, and 9 because they have 9-year-old first graders. And
What?
these parents, yeah, like,
Hey, this is the new Texas, Raph.
yeah. So what happens?
Hold him back.
Yeah, hold him back. So he has a 9-year-old on his team who's like a monster. Like the kid's like this is coach pitch, and he's just hitting dongs, and like the kid's like a whole head taller than Cash, and he like kind of like shrugs his shoulders. But the one thing is when we started, because he didn't play last year, you know, with the type 1 deal, he didn't want to. So this year, so of course, like the coaches go out and draft, and he just kind of got put on this team. And he was like batting last, and he basically hits the ball every single time it comes up. So he goes 3 for 3, 4 for 4. And so all of a sudden within like 5 or 6 games, he had like moved up in like the, you know, and like the coach is like, he's great. Every time I put him out there, he gets a base hit, you know, hits it down the gap, moves it around. And now all of a sudden he's obviously batting much better. But it's really interesting, like how into it these parents are, to the point where, you know, one of the dads was like all pissed off. I'm like, dude, just let them have a good time, because there's a point where it's not fucking fun. Like, stop ruining this for these kids. And I get just a little defensive because, you know, like just because you failed as a athlete doesn't mean that you're going to somehow intrinsically live an alternate life by, you know, fucking berating your 7-year-old because he can't play baseball.
But the thing is, they need it. That's the part that we've forgotten as parents. They need I don't know, for lack of a better term, but they need to suffer. They need to fail. They need to strike out. They need to have that boneheaded play, because they'll never learn. Like, it's amazing to me where, I don't know if you read the statistic, but they said half of Major League Baseball are foreign.
Yeah.
Half.
Yeah.
And that's a mind-blowing number. But what you do realize is there's a lot of ways to get there. Culturally, the Japanese are amazing because of their Eastern philosophy, their attention to detail, their respect for the game, the way that they have a whole culture of they train like the little guy. Even though you have the world's greatest player right now is Shohei Ohtani, who is not a little guy, but for the most part, they all kind of put themselves in this little man syndrome, and they train and they play with that little man syndrome as if they have something to prove. So they're going to develop themselves along that martial culture. But when you go down to Latin America, it's amazing because what they do from Monday to Friday is they grind. They just crush it. They work really, really hard. But on the weekends, it's a party. And so when you go to games, especially around here with such a Cuban, Dominican influence around here, those teams from the Dominican and the Latin American countries, I mean, their parents, they're bringing noisemakers and piñatas, and they got grills and they're cooking out. And you never hear them scream or yell or negatively criticize any of their kids. They're just, I mean, it is just a fiesta party versus in America, it's, what are we doing here? What are you thinking? Come on, Johnny. God, get out of there. And the whole time, it's amazing because that's not going to get out of the kid what you think it's going to get out of the kid.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that we found and we walked away from a situation is when you yell at a 8, 9, 10, 12-year-old, what they give you is their best half effort because they're going to play within this margin that they're not going to make as many mistakes, but they also ain't going to be awesome. And that's the worst thing you could do is teach a kid, be average, be right in here, stay within the lines versus, you know what? Go out there. And the Dominican kids, they'll have an error and they go, whatever, who cares? And they'll go out there and you'll see another amazing diving play. And if they get an error, the ball gets past them. So what? But they'll do it again. And it's absolutely amazing when you see that shift. So the goal is to figure out how can we bring the best of all those worlds into one system.
Kathy, who owns the horse riding school next door, is 65 years old, and she's pretty much had that place for over 25 years. So tens of thousands of kids have come and learned to ride from her. And I've asked her repeatedly because I feel like in terms of child development, she's seen it all. Because, I mean, not only is she training these girls to be able to jump and 100 jumpers and, English jumping, but now you have to teach them to have a relationship with an animal and then try to, like, coax this animal over these jumps. And so she has an entire system. And I've said to her, like in terms of developing these athletes, she's like, I'm raising kids. I'm raising girls. I'm teaching them skill sets on how to take care of the horse, how to work in this symbiotic relationship, how to coach through it. And she made an interesting point where one of her the kids that she developed has gone on and she works at a big barn in Florida and is like a real like high-end horse trainer. And she came and worked out with us. And I asked Kathy about her, and she's like, the one difference between this girl and some of the most talented riders. I was like, I don't know, desire. And she's like, no, their parents literally pulled up, pushed them out the door and drove away and let them figure it out. She's like, it's like when you have a whole bunch of dogs that are brand new, you like throw them into a yard and like they kind of figure out their hierarchy. But if the parents and the owners stand around and kind of try to do all this, the dogs end up fighting because they're on leashes and they don't understand hierarchy. And she said the kids that tend to do the worst are the parents that are helicopter micromanaging, going and getting the horse and cleaning it and doing everything for the kid and then basically putting out there and then standing there. And then the kid has all this pressure of expectation. And she's like, I tell these parents that are over there living and dying with each kid's failure and their success, like, go have a coffee, leave. Just like let the kid have their space. And all of the kids that had space have grown up to be well-adjusted, successful, and whether or not they continue to ride have gone on and doing very well. She said the kids, the parents micromanage, exact opposite. So one of the things we do with Kelly, like I tell her and wife, Kate does too, go to the barn, call if you need something. And we let her go over there and she has to come home before dark and like just give her the autonomy to go over and do these things. Kate ends up working with Kathy a bunch, but I love talking with her about this development thing. And she's like, Because it's really easy for us to be like, oh, that's not how it was. And I asked Kathy, and she's like, it's always been like this. There's always been parents that take a much bigger interest, not because they're interested in it, because there's some internal validation that they need. And we see this at baseball, we see it at sports. People ask me, I'm like, honestly, my parents came to games, and they probably didn't even come to a game until we were much better. But, I also remember there were dads that showed up to every single practice when I was in high school for football. My dad's like, I'm in court. I'm like, I'm not coming to these games. Like, I'm not, like he just, like, it wasn't until later that he got super into it. But I think that there is a very real deal where you have to let these players, and you're talking in the Dominican, I've heard reports that those kids are playing at midnight and there's not a parent to be found. They'll play baseball all day and there's not a single parent. When the parents show up.
With any object.
Yeah, with anything. Well, yeah, I mean, so these kids will play all day during the week. The parents are obviously working, and then the parents get to come on the weekends and watch them and have barbecue and have fun, and they're there to have a good time. So they are there more showing off for their parents more so than like demanding some expectation. Mm-hmm. And this like helicopter parenting and just social media, and I got to somehow push my kid to the top to make him a star. It's got to be overwhelming. I don't know if I told Chris, but I had a dad reach out to me through my brother. He knew my brother, reached out to me about working with his son who was an offensive lineman. So I reached out to the guy and I was like, hey, bring the kid by on a Saturday. I can tell you within 10 minutes whether or not it's a strength problem, a technique problem, or he might just need to learn some different skills. And so I reached out to the dad. I'm like, 8 a.m. I train Saturdays, bring him over. The dad hits me back. He's really overwhelmed. He's got a lot going on. He was hoping maybe after prom he could, and I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, I wasn't talking about anything other than just bring the kid over. I'll talk to him. We'll train a little bit. I'll put him through some things, and I'll at least give you a roadmap on what he needs to do to improve. That doesn't feel like a lot of pressure, but like the thought of, the dad and this, and like just too overwhelming for the kid. And my comment is, if this is overwhelming at 17, if he decides to go play college football, he's not going to be able to handle the load. Jamie, my daughter, asked me when we started lifting weights, I had to get my mom to take me or take the bus. There's to be able to make these things happen, you find any way you can. Matt, who's my buddy from my wrestler buddy who lives up the road, he tells a story that there was a guy in his town that told him, hey, I have this tape of defensive line drills. And he and his brother were trying to get better. They grew up in upstate New York. And I'll probably butcher the story, but he called the dude every day trying to get it. And I think eventually had his mom drop him off at the guy's house, knocked on the door, and waited while the guy found it. And then they watched it so many times that it pretty much turned streaky, and they wore the tape out because it was the only thing that they had. There was no internet, nobody to teach them defensive line drills, and they were so starved for information.
That's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, those are the stories that usually come from mastery. When somebody goes on, these are the stories, you go to the Hall of Fame and the guy will tell their story. Every one of the stories has an origin story of some early struggle. There was very few people that are like, oh, my parents paid for the best coaches and I went and did this, other than maybe tennis. Tennis is about the only one where you hear, this mastery story of the parents being super involved and the best coaches in that. But for sports like football and baseball and some of these others, usually the origin story is very, user centric. I wasn't any good. I needed to get better. I didn't have an opportunity, so I created one.
It's interesting on that Hall of Fame note. Something that really helped out Raider and hopefully can help out the listeners, especially when it comes to baseball, is currently in the scheme of baseball, home runs are everything. Launch angle and how far.
Chicks dig the long ball, Raph.
Chicks dig the long ball, and it's just. So all of these kids all celebrate it. And when Raiders started this journey 3 years ago, everything was, he would have these coaches screaming at him to murder the ball, absolutely destroy the ball, smash it, get angry at the ball. And he was just popping everything up because that's what he would do, is just grip the bat real tight. And he was just try to smash this ball. And, we ended up going to lunch with one of my former athletes, Fred McGriff, who just got inducted into the Hall of Fame. And he goes, Raider, I didn't hit my first home run till I was well into high school. And Raider was like, what? And he goes, yeah. He goes, all I try to do is just hit the ball into the gaps. And he goes, I wanted to hit home runs. I just never could because I wasn't big enough. I wasn't strong enough. And he goes, so what I'm telling you now is just hit the ball smooth. He goes, just be smooth. You want a swing that you can replicate. And he goes, by the time you're 13, you're hitting puberty, and 14 and 15, you'll start packing on some home run hitting muscle. And he goes, but those home runs will be quality home runs where you're driving the ball and you're trying to hit a line drive, but the unintended consequence is that it just so happens to go over the wall. And when Raider heard that, that was huge for him because then all the pressure dropped and he was like, you know what? I'm just going to hit smooth. I'm just going to hit smooth. And it's been a great, great blessing for him to hear that from one of the best that's ever done it.
We interrupt this episode with a shameless self-promotion. Are you pushing through performance roadblocks caused by pain or janky movement mechanics? Knock the rust off with our movement health courses, used by thousands of athletes worldwide, from average Joes to MVPs. Our courses give you the tools to assess and fix yourself so you can get back to break-in necks and cash in checks. Not convinced? Get a taste of how our courses can help you by enrolling in a free sample today. Head to powerathletehq.com and search courses from the menu. Now back to the show.
We're touching on a lot of points that I want to help connect the dots, Raph. So applying ASAP, and then your approach to teaching, integrating, and then challenging, which eventually leads to replication in this controlled training environment. So speak to that ASAP and the approach that we can hand off to the coaches and the parents out there.
So for us and those who have followed for a long time, ASAP has a superficial and a deep meaning. The superficially is artificially, the superficial meaning is the accentuated skill acquisition, but the deeper one is the artificially self-applied pressure. And for us, once we acquire that skill, we want to encourage the athlete. We want to mentor the athlete. We want to give them the tools to practice how to artificially self-apply that pressure. One of the things that we found, exactly what you just talked about, John, is there's always going to be pressure. There's always, from the moment that they decide that this is something that they like to do, and whether it's coming from their peers or their coaches or their parents or the media and the press and the fans and the social media, there's always going to be pressure. One of the things that we found is let's teach these kids twofold how to challenge themselves, because it is a skill. It is a very, very lost art skill for a lot of this new generation of athletes. I can't tell you the weird shift that has occurred where we have 13, 14, 15 high school age kids, boys, that I have to encourage them to put more weight on the bar. And I couldn't imagine that growing up. We grew up in an age, John, where we put on more weight than we should have. Yeah. Like, I can't lift this on my own, but listen, I'm going to put 2 plates on there because I want to feel like I did 225. And nowadays it's like, okay, hey, Johnny, you did that 10 reps, 3 sets on this last set. Let's put a little bit of weight on there. And I want you to challenge your ability to get those 10. And you would think that we asked them to jump off the roof, but it's a strange skill that has kind of lost its way, where everything is success oriented, and we've lost that affinity for failure. We've lost the ability to see failure for what it's worth. So teaching the kids how to artificially self-apply that pressure has been big for us, because as we teach that skill, and if we use a fundamental skill like the 5-10-5 or the 3-cone L drill, we do what we always say is we have a metric, a standard of, okay, here's 5 yards, here's 5 yards, here's 5 yards. But then we start to kick the cone around a little bit. We start to move it. We start to sharpen the angle. We start to extend one out. So if I extend the first portion and turn that into a 7 yard. Now all of a sudden the athlete is running a little faster to come in through that speed cut. So we're challenging them. And so we try to make it a culture within them and within our group so that they start to understand that it's okay. You're going to fail. Now let's figure out, wow, you're coming in sharper. How do you adjust? And John, you can attest to this, is playing at a high level is all about adjustability. Can you adjust? Everything is adjustment. It's no matter what you do, there is never a perfection of an environment. And so Raider has this goal of he one day he's like, I want to go play pro baseball. Well, we put him in environments where he's around pro baseball players, he's around pro baseball coaches. And I said, listen, the most important thing you can gain is what you hear. And that's all they talk about. Is he'll get in the batter's box, or the guys will get in the batter's box and they'll pop the ball up, and the coach will say, okay, they pop it up once, he'll pop it up twice, and the coach will say adjust. And he's like, what are they talking about? He goes, well, when you're in a pro game, that pitcher is throwing, he's trying to strike you out. And if you do something that you don't like, you have to adjust. The coach isn't going to tell you, the manager's not going to tell you, your teammates aren't going to tell you. It is your job is to go, okay, I popped the ball up. What do I need to do? And so teaching the athlete how to increase their adjustability, it comes from, number one, giving them a more comprehensive physical skill. So you can't adjust if you don't have the tools to adjust. If your contact strength is poor, where you can't go, you know what, I got a lot of weight on the outside of my foot, I need to get that in. If you don't have that strength or that control, your adjustability goes down. If you don't have pressure on the toes and you can't feel it, then your adjustability goes down. So giving them the physical tools to raise their level of adjustability. But then again, you also need to make sure that that psychomotor drive is in there, so that the psychological portion, they need to be able to emotionally adjust. They go, okay, you know what? I failed. How can I take a big deep breath? How can I calm myself down? Or sometimes what we found is a lot of athletes will ride this success train, and sometimes they rush. And so we'll get an athlete who has an amazing play, has an amazing play, has an amazing play, has an amazing play. And next thing you know, they just completely crap the bed because they get so amped up. And so one of the things that we try to teach them is find out where you perform best. What is your barometric pressure? And figure out, okay, if you screwed up, okay, let me figure out how to get that back to here. Okay, I'm amped up. Yeah, you had 5 awesome plays in a row, but put yourself in the barometric pressure that allows you to be the best version of yourself on the next play, whatever that is. And so being able to ASAP that, of saying, listen, we're going to apply pressure in training so that you can figure out where your pressure boiling point is. And okay, I'm there, I'm aware of it. And now we've taught you, whether it's box breathing, whether it's cold water instant awesome, whether it's woo-saw, play with your earlobes, whatever it is that you feel you need to do to get yourself back to the most highly effective barometric pressure that you can perform in.
I love it. Yeah. I'll tell you what I missed out on was that return to level mentally. As an example, we run different drills in lacrosse, and when I'm feeding the ball, I'm intentionally giving passes that are not perfect. And I'm not saying I'm great, but I'm good enough to just put the ball where I want it to on a nonchalant pass. So I just call it a bad pass drill, forcing the guys to either move their body or catch an awkward pass, because it's never going to be perfect from a high schooler in a game. And they get emotions. Oh, terrible pass. And they get emotional about it. I'm intentionally doing that, and then just putting them in a position to deal with it and commenting on that. But then I failed to give them the tools, the box breathing and whatnot, to return to neutral.
Do you think there's a way to manage expectation, especially for younger kids, discussing failure? That, failure, I'm more nervous if nothing fails, or, I just wonder if there's, if we put so much pressure, there's this desire for mastery or excellence. And not to dogpile on social media, but you have a situation in, let's say, whether it be TikTok or Instagram, where everybody's putting their best foot forward at all times. So now they're seeing like everybody's best vacation and how they look up in the morning. And, there's always this like best foot forward at all times that real life is not what you see on social media, but yet these kids are understanding it or on YouTube or whatnot. So I wonder if managing expectation, that there's actually a module probably within the coaching paradigm of managing expectation, expecting a failure, and more importantly, like teaching that failure is a part. I get nervous if you don't fail. I'm not going to get mad if you fail now, but you brought up a good point earlier in this discussion. What I'm more searching for is effort, where now, hey, you're gonna fail, but and you used to tell me all the time, hey, if you're gonna fail, I want you to fail at 100 miles an hour. Like, don't fail at half speed. Like, if you're going to run bad, like, run as fast as you can and we'll clean stuff up. So there's managing expectation that, if you were perfect at this, you wouldn't be here. You'd be teaching somebody else.
100%. And we say it all the time is stop the bleeding. It's mitigate the bleeding. And one of the common problems that we run into, and not just with young people, is you make a mistake, you bring that barometric pressure really high, and you have a tendency to play small. Now, the only thing that really comes from that is underperforming, or you make another mistake, thus spiraling downhill. And so one of the things that we should do to manage that expectation is, number one is we try to film those failures. We try to expose those failures, but we try to pair it up in a positive way. One of the easiest ways to do it in the weight room is through manual resistance. It's literally put them in position. Okay, give me your best effort and hold this position as long as you can. You're not going to win this. This is a fight that you will not win. You will fail at this, because if you are winning, then I'm not doing my job, or your teammate's not doing their job. But can you give it your best effort on the next one? And so in a set of 5, by the time you get to the 3rd and 4th and the 5th rep, you have that option. You can either dial it down and play small and not go as hard as you can, or you can develop that psychomotor driver of, you know what, you are going to win this one, but I'm going to give this my best effort. I'm going to give this my best one. And then you start to talk to them about that, because one of the commonalities, especially in young athletes, is they immediately go to worst case scenario. That's why the barometric pressure goes so high. What if I miss this shot? What if I miss this game-winning shot? And they automatically go to there. My friends are going to laugh at me. The cute girl in the stands who I'm really adore won't talk to me. My parents are going to be disappointed in me. So we use those as opportunities to say, hey, you're going to fail at this, but what about it? I mean, so what? Give it your best effort. They may, and we try to be truthful. You know what? That girl may not like you, but guess what? Give it your best effort, because you don't stand a chance on the next play if you don't give it your best effort. And in order for that lesson to really sink in, it's that brain-derived neurotrophic factors is they got to feel it. That's one of those things that they have to feel. They have to feel how miserable it is to do manual resistance shin. And then you take that into something that we used to do a lot is, okay, you're going to do manual resistance, hip abduction, and then you're going to do a heavy triple on lunges. And then they crank it and be like, wow, that's 275, 315, whatever the case may be. We're going to do another set of manual resistance, and then you're going to try to do the same weight, if not more. And bam, they do it. And this light bulb goes off like, you just destroyed musculotendinous units. You just created fatigue and failure in this very vital, fundamental component. And yet I could still push this big, heavy weight. And so getting them to feel it and understand that is a huge cog in the wheel of getting them to develop that mental confidence, that emotional confidence that helps them do that on the field when they're not around, when you're not around.
That's everything right there.
Yeah.
Any other questions before some fun ones, John?
No.
That was very well put, Raph.
Thanks, sir.
What are some of the common mistakes As we're kind of, obviously this is directed more towards sprinting and developing sprinting within, a module. But what would be some of the like simple, easy kind of like, pitfalls for people to look out for as they get into this? Is, overcoaching effort, not focusing on arm swing. I'm just wondering, like, as they go through this model, what are some of the easy things that they can just look out for so that they don't, blow the proverbial tire 10 feet from home in a pothole?
I would say comprehensive nature. I think that is one of those things. Just because somebody isn't open-minded to it right now, making sure that your training system is checking off as many boxes, because at some point in time, the majority of athletes will get it. It may not happen this week. It definitely won't happen this next workout, but I would say that the majority of coaches in this field are just like athletes, and that's why we developed our pipeline standards. Is we're going to want to do what we do best. We're going to want to do what we like to do. And if I don't like Olympic lifting, I'm going to find every reason not to get my athletes to Olympic lift. And I'm going to find in social media, we're going to say, hey, Olympic lifting is bad for this, this, and this. So that's why we don't do it. Versus saying, listen, I don't really like it, but I'm going to teach it, especially if you're in charge of high school athletes who for a fact they're going to go to college and somebody's going to teach them how to Olympic lift. I would much rather me go in there and say, listen, we're not going to do 300 pounds, but you're going to do 225 really freaking awesome. And if it's up to you and you become a 18, 22-year-old Olympic lifting champion, awesome. But right now, you're going to have impeccable form. Or you may not like stretching, or you may not like this, that, and a third, but check off on those boxes. Make sure that you're at least comprehensive with your approach, even if you feel like they never mastered it by the time that they left your doors. Number two is, I would say, without a doubt, because if you follow that same approach of, I'm going to make sure you do everything, I would say what I've forgotten early in my career is, don't be afraid to encourage the athletes to be themselves. And so another really, really good athlete of mine in the baseball world offered some really good advice to Raider. And he said, unapologetically, don't be afraid to be you. Take the best from what you see, but don't be afraid to be the best Raider. And to me, that was powerful, because there's so many people, especially when you have athletes of ability, they'll say, oh, wow, you look like Trey Turner. You look like Mookie Betts. You look like, and his advice, Gary Sheffield's advice to Raider was, don't be afraid to be you. Just be the best you. If the best you is the best you, then, and it makes it and all your dreams come true, then great. If not, then figure out, if you like that piece of what somebody else is doing, bring it into your game, but it's you. Don't try to be Shohei Ohtani.
The worst is when somebody says that and you don't like the person. Hey, you remind me of this person. You're like, that guy sucked. Like, I had a guy, I've had a couple people reach out to me over the years that were going into the NFL Combine and coming out with a coaching deal. And it was funny because they were like, oh, the guy was like, oh, you remind us, you get a lot of like a good punch like John Wellborn. And he goes, so I've heard my name from certain people. And my comment to them was like, were you happy about that or not? And they were like, no, I thought it was a good thing. I'm like, okay. Because I always thought that it was like, hey, you remind me of this guy. And you're like, that guy was a piece of shit. Like, oh, damn it. I better get my shit going. But no, that's a funny deal. So, but yeah, no, I mean, it always goes back to, you have to understand what your wheelhouse is and stay in your wheelhouse, develop other skills, but never at the expense of who you are. And I think as an athlete, the sooner you know who you are and you stop trying to do shit that's outside your skill set, Like if Raider is has a very unique skill set, he needs to enhance that skill set. He's not going to be like, oh, all of a sudden now I'm just going to fucking hit bombs. Every time I get up, I'm just going for home runs. He's more like, hey, I'm going to hit it up the gap, get on base, and just make things happen until he develops it. So I think having a realistic understanding of who you are, where you're at, and then more importantly, somebody to nurture it and not try to coach you into something that you're not. Like I was never going to be 6'8", 350 pounds. So them showing me techniques and video on 6'8", 350-pound dudes, I was like, I'm never going to be this guy. This guy's got like a fucking 8-foot wingspan, each long, So finding people that, what was helpful for me, finding people that fit within who I thought and within my skill set was extremely valuable. And then realizing like, okay, this is what I do well. Now I'm going to lean on these things and I'm going to develop them. That was part of my contention with CrossFit. Oh, just work on your weaknesses. Yes, but never at the expense of who I am. If this is what I do and I'm a, big punch, big hard hit, start the fight early type of guy, I'm never going to put myself into a situation that I know is not one that I'm going to do well at.
Raph,
What's up?
Oh, there he goes.
we lost you, but
We
now
got
we
you
got
back.
you. Yeah.
So like Cash's swing is going to probably be a lot like the big guys out there swinging right now, because right now there's a lot of video going of Aaron Judge, who's 6'6", 270, whatever he is, and Otani, who's just about the same size.
Is he that big? I didn't know he was that
Yes.
tall.
Oh, huge! They are giant people.
Really?
Yeah, giant.
I just had
Yeah,
never.
look-
Yeah, I'm gonna look him up.
Look it up.
I know who he is. I just didn't think he was that big.
Huge. Like I would say that Otani is at an interesting point right now because he is that big, that fast. He is potentially a Cy Young Award winner on the mound. He could go out there and be a Gold Glover in the field. Like he's an interesting character because you're kind of looking at a generational athlete within the baseball arena that you just don't see guys like this a lot. He is a very, very special athlete right now. So, and I don't think enough people are appreciating just what we get to watch if you appreciate baseball. And he's fast. I mean, he is like blazing fast. He's just very unique athlete.
Wow.
What does it say? What do you got?
His Wikipedia does not have. I'm gonna put his.
If you go to MLB, I think it has it on there.
Let me put it in. I'll just put in his height. 6'4". Yeah, listen,
Yeah.
6'4", 210. Wow.
Yeah, big boy.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've seen him on the mound. I just didn't. I don't know why I didn't calculate, because probably I saw that he was Japanese, so I didn't think he was 6'4".
Yeah, absolutely. Just never realized he is a big boy, and then Judge is even bigger.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Cool.
So
Anything else?
Couple more here.
Okay.
You commented on the value of freeze framing to show your athletes different positions and make connections to a dead bug, if you will. We also have experienced freeze framing different high-level sprinters to help make different arguments for specific techniques that don't involve arm swing. So what do you say this, I guess, the value of freeze frame versus what some people are using it for to make points in different, we'll call it pose methods, that don't value the arm swing as much as you've attested in your career?
well, I think the number one thing is don't abuse it. That's really the goal. Is obviously, to me, the abuse comes from validation in a way to create large amounts of revenue. I'm a firm believer that when you freeze frame something, you have to understand that it is to get across your specific point of how it applies to your system versus taking one single snapshot, which might be an unintended consequence. Because there's a couple of things out there that now go, look, if you watch this video, or if you watch this clip, or if you look at this picture of this position, so now we're going to train that position. But one of the things that we oftentimes forget within strength and conditioning is the job is to strengthen and condition creating motion, but it's also controlling excessive motion. And the controlling excessive motion is the part that oftentimes gets forgotten. So if you have a motion that moves outside of a framework, for instance, the posterior arm swing, and everybody says, okay, keep 90-90. Well, if you watch some frames, there's some athletes that let that arm almost straighten out behind them. So it would be really easy to take a snapshot of that and say, look, his arm is straight, so we're going to train this straight arm. That's not the intended purpose of that straight arm. It's he is driving it back so far that's where it just carried, and he was trying to bring it back forward in a fluid motion. So when you look at certain things like as I move here and here, well, if you ever watch a high speed sprinter, there is some twisting, there is some turning, but it doesn't mean that they are forcibly trying to twist and trying to turn. It is a consequence of very forceful linear actions. And so to sit there and say, okay, I'm going to look at this video and see somebody doing this. So now I'm going to try to do this when I run. Yes. So
Well, this is David Weck's deal. I had David Weck on the podcast, and he talks about this head over knee. As people start to go, there's this position where it's head over knee, and like to me, it just looks like people's heads are moving because they're clearing the arm going through as the swing. So, I mean, is the head coming over the knee 100%? And I think what he's railing against is this kind of Michael Johnson really fixed position here. Like it, I understand what he's trying to get at. Like the spine has kind of a torsion. He calls it a spinal engine. Like I don't know. It didn't feel like that big a stretch of an argument, but it also didn't feel like something that you had to drive a stake in the nail to necessarily teach. That as you come through in the arm swing, the head should come across the body. You know, I mean, I was never able to do like the fixed little drummer boy. And but there were sprinters that do. I mean, if you watch Usain Bolt, he gets a ton of movement this way, but he actually uses it to generate force out of the blocks.
Absolutely. With a taller runner like that, you get that lateral displacement of the hip. There isn't, and I would imagine a lot has to do with the fact that he was so tall, and being able to produce that much force on a longer segment forces you. So you're either going to weeble wobble or you're going to spiral. That's the way your body will compensate. So it always comes down to, I don't believe that that's their the intended action is to spiral engine in it. I believe that it is a consequence of I'm going to try to drive my leg back as far as I can. And because it's going back as far as I can, it will naturally externally rotate. That's the natural job of that glute, meaning it's going to go. So I have to, in essence, work it back through. It's not my main focus to do that. And that's where I think the mix up becomes is, oh, I see it, so I'm going to try to overemphasize it versus I see it and maybe they're not trying to do it. It is the unintended consequence of my linear action.
I got into this with Dr. Romanoff, where there was a video clip that talked to, it was actually Usain Bolt going through his cues that he thinks about in his head. And it was dive and drive, punch and hammer, and, knee up, toe up. And as he's going through, like I'm saying all these in repetition as I'm sprinting, and he went through kind of a slow motion of him sprinting, being like, dive and drive, head up, punch and hammer, and he went through all of his cues. And I ended up sending it to Dr. Romanoff, and he just scoffed and goes, he doesn't know what he's doing. And my comment to him was like, maybe so, but if those cues are giving the intended consequence of the fastest guy, why would you coach something else? So what you're saying is that your cues, like, how do I say this? The wrong cues are giving the right expectation or the right product. So does it make sense to like teach from that product or just do the wrong cues? And he's like, well, the best athletes in the world don't know why they're the best athletes. And I'm like, yeah, but those cues are allowing them to do the best. So how can you say he's not doing this?
Well, I always use the smell test. If I watch elite movers move, and it doesn't look like the person who's demonstrating it, to me, that's a telltale sign. So I love his enthusiasm. I love his passion. But when I watch David do his motion, and I don't see that in elite movers. I just don't. When I watch somebody run, I look at that and I'm like, wow, look at Ricky Henderson run the base path. I don't see that. I don't see a Usain Bolt. When I watch pose runners who are teaching the class, and then when I watch a Usain Bolt, like, to me, that should be a wow, that's Usain teaching the class. He's just running faster on a track. But if they don't match up well, that, to me, that's always a clear indication that I need to take that with some grain of salt.
Well, he was also showing Dion where he called it like 2 up, 2 down, but Dion had the ball in his hand and he was kind of doing this motion, trying to, like, basically generate force. And so he was
Correct.
using whatever he had because he was holding a ball. It wasn't that he was holding one and doing like a motion like this. And I think his spinal engine, I think it's interesting because we don't do a lot of contralateral type movements. And I definitely know that there's a neurological efficiency. Like, he did have a pretty good one where he was talking about like the rope kind of twirling deal, like forcing the non-dominant hand to be dominant. So then like trying to get the dominant hand to give up dominance is a way to like improve neurological function. And like that part, I thought, man, that's okay. That's interesting. But then again, I can't imagine jumping rope without jumping. So it's an interesting take, and I appreciate that somebody is thinking outside the box. But
100%, absolutely.
yeah. So I mean, I think outside the box. But the issue I ran into was, and the connection was kind of crappy, so I didn't get a chance to really ask the question I want to ask him in person, which is, you watch these guys come from side to side. It feels more that their head is just clearing for the shoulder, because as the body, I mean, we saw people come like this, but it's more, for me, almost a 30-degree, 20-degree angle, where all of a sudden, I'm sorry, it'd be 70 this way. So, I mean, as they came this way, a lot of guys are coming back across the body and they're getting some motion like this. So I just wondered if it was clearing the head, or the arms, the shoulder coming up is what's making the head kind of deviate from side to side.
To me, it's just they're producing so much motion that the excess is what they're looking at. So as I'm driving, it's naturally gonna to turn me a little bit. It's naturally gonna to twist me a little bit, as opposed to that is 100% specifically. I'm not trying to turn. I am trying to powerfully. I'm trying to punch. It's like, if you ever seen somebody try to knock out somebody else, there is excessive motion outside of that. So to me, that's all that is I'm trying to kick somebody really hard in the IT band. Well, there's always going to be some carryover. If I'm trying to swing as hard as I can, if I'm in the batter's box, or if I'm trying to pitch, there's always going to be motion of unintended consequences. And to me, that's what that they're fixated on, and they're trying to train, versus that's really not what the athlete is intending to do. So, but it is what it is. And again, I appreciate that. We have this thing called the 8-tool school. And it started with Raider, and that's within the baseball world, there's a 5-tool. That's how you judge out an athlete's skill. The 6th tool is what they always say is the limiting factor, and that's the mental capacity of the athlete, how they bring their mental game. And so what we started to do, and we started when Raider did this, was, listen, I don't care if you bat right or left, but you're going to train left as well, because it trains both eyes. It's going to square you up. You're going to dial in. You're going to develop a little bit more symbiosis, so that you don't end up getting overly developed, increasing too much torque on your back. So you're going to train both. Well, as an unintended consequence, Raider's gotten really good at switch hitting now. So he has a really good swing on right to left, and he's tracking really well. So there is beautiful benefit to a lot of that. And I appreciate guys like that who are willing to turn over every stone and figure it out. But oftentimes what you find is, again, somebody fixates on something, and the profit becomes his own, and he starts to just grab things and throw in there just to prove his own point, when sometimes maybe that point doesn't need to be proven.
Well, and with a lot of these training systems, and I'll just use Victor Hugo. So Victor, the BJJ guy we work with, one of the top ultras in the world, had a terrible back injury. L4, L5, had a lot of issues, very little ability to recruit anything in the lower body. Still becomes one of the top guys, comes in, can't tie his shoes. The back squat was absolutely terrible. And he had done all of these different systems, and all I could see was pain in his face. And I'm like, dude, all of these systems and these movements, everything is great if you're already pretty strong, stable, and healthy. So there was a whole kind of maturation phase of getting him strong and stable and out of pain, and teaching him how to, do dead bugs, and especially, increase hip flexibility and all these other key factors, and getting him really strong. Now all of a sudden that he's out of pain and he's strong, now all of a sudden he's able to do all these things and they look great. And my issue comes down to the training system should be able to take somebody that is not exposed to something and take them on this journey of mastery. If the only thing that the training system does is allows you to display what you already have, then is it really just more of a skill acquisition, more so than, hey, we got to start at the basics. I got to get you really strong on a bilateral hip hinge, and then start mixing in unilateral movements once now you have the strength and the musculature to control your body in space, and then step, squat, lunge, and then there's a huge progression. Now all of a sudden he can do all this rotation and all this jazzy bell stuff because he's already strong. So I sometimes worry with a lot of these training systems, if you take somebody that is already a great athlete, that's already strong, that's already an incredible mover, they just make it look great, and they're like, oh, this works amazing. And I'm like, yeah, but what if you can't do any of that stuff? What if you can't do a push-up? What if you're in such pain that you can't tie your shoes? How does this system allow you to go from this to this? And I don't know if a lot of them do.
You're right. Absolutely. But again, it comes back to being comprehensive. I think that's the goal, is every athlete should be able to, again, to circle back around the band work and the fundamentals and those ISOs, everybody should be able to do, whether or not you treat it as a workout. But now it's a point where you, John, can treat that as a warm-up, but it's still coming back to those same basics. It's the shoulder. Everybody's body can move in the same exact ways. So irregardless, we should be able to comprehensively approach that. We just have to change the protocols from, hey, here's your basic shoulder warm-up before you do bench and pulls, versus here is the workout. It's the same exercises, but we just change a couple of the modules and the modalities and the methods behind developing it.
Which I think speaks to the expansive and the longevity of athlete ASAP, power athlete tools, and also ability to teach it. Yeah. So it's repeatable versus these one-off individuals that may represent the specific exercise or tool. This is repeatable amongst any athlete, any age, all over, from top-tier NFL, Major League Baseball, military, fighters, Raph, from your experience, swimmers, and diving in, and it's focused on movement and performance.
Yeah, no, like looking at David's system as we went through it, I think if you're already pretty strong and stable and you can do a lot of things, I'm sure there's a lot of fun in it. And as I looked at it, I thought, man, this looks like a good time. But I can't imagine somebody that has a back injury or some of these other things doing, or
a 13-year-old
or a 13-year-old that doesn't have good coordination. I like to think, what did I say? One time I told a guy, you need to be strong enough to be able to defend yourself against crazy shit. So like somebody asks you to do something that's a little non-conventional, am I strong enough to survive it? Whereas, Raph, do you remember that dude we used to see, that bodybuilder that would do, that would walk up and down the
stadium?
Yeah, the stadium at UT with this guy would walk up and down doing like walking lunges up with 315 on his back. And he was just
shoot from Vision Quest?
Straight up. And the guy would go up and down, and as he was going up, his knee would drive in and hit the cement, and he would bounce off the cement, and his back would break, and we would watch this, and the guy would get done, and we would I remember Raph would be like, stop, everybody, let's just watch this. Is he going to die today? And he used to hit his knee, his back would bend and he'd get done, he would drop the weight off and be like, and he was a big jack bodybuilder. But that was a good indication of he just because you can do it doesn't mean you should do it. And the guy's obviously strong enough to survive the damage that he's doing. but like everything he's doing is, his back is rounding, he's collapsing, he's jamming his knee. I mean, all of these things were happening in real time. And we used to just watch him go up and down, and be like, how is this dude not dead? So, do you remember that? I still think, I can still picture the dude up, and he was jacked. I mean, don't get me wrong. But then people would look at it and be like, oh, he's super jacked. This must be the reason he's jacked. He's probably jacked in spite of all the shit that he was doing. So are you strong enough to survive a lot of the, like I got tagged in a video the other day. This guy was doing depth jumps from 12 feet.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I saw that too.
Yeah, the 12-foot depth jumps. And I was like fucking in awe, just waiting for his patellar tendons to rupture up. Okay, so he's the one dude that can survive it. I mean, that's not replicatable. And to have your athletes, when the depth jump thing, I think I've told you guys a story when the depth jump thing happened, I was in high school and our track coach had us like jump off of like a picnic bench. So we had to jump off and like land and then try to jump. And then he basically stacked 2 picnic tables and we had to jump off, and all of a sudden everybody got patellar tendonitis. To this day, like I think that's where my patellar tendonitis, it didn't start there. I tripped over a hurdle, jammed my knee in the ground, got tendonitis, and we went and did that, and that basically solidified it. But we couldn't reduce force and jump into another one. People were just like hitting the ground and collapsing because we weren't strong enough to defend ourselves.
I see John's point on defending yourself against crazy shit, but Raph, you also have the reputation. When I was with you as high-level pool athletes, swimmers, and then you brought them out to the field to do fun shit, and then me as a field athlete brought me into the waters to do fun shit. When John was with you, did you do that cross training, if you will, bringing him into the ocean and trying to test them with fun stuff that was still safe?
We always do that. It was always something that we try to do. I don't know if we ever took, John, did we used to go to the ocean, but
no, we used to go out to the pool. You remember we used to do that pool with the weights and the dumbbells, and the plates. We used to jump out of the water.
Drown proofing?
Yeah. Well, what we would try to do is we would try to do plyos, like hold the plates over and drive up against it, like kind of squat down and do that. I grew up in Southern California. I could swim before I could almost walk. So like swimming for me is no big deal. A lot of the guys really struggled with the swimming, which is funny because then we would just try to drown them, like swim underneath and pull their legs and fuck with people.
You and McLaughlin were like the really good swimmers. Nobody else was. Yeah,
but we grew up in Southern California. You got to be able to swim. I sometimes think, like looking back on some of this, non-conventional training, it adds an element, obviously, of like, newness, where now I have to develop a new skill set. So, maybe neurologically, but at the end of the day, it's just fun.
Right.
And that's, something like, as I was talking to Jamie last night about jits, and she's like, I haven't got a stripe and it's not fun. And I'm like, why isn't it fun? And she's like, well, a lot of my friends that used to show up don't show up anymore. And now I realized that like it was social for her. And now all of a sudden, because, very few kids are going to come consistently a couple days a week for just months on end. They kind of fade in and out. And, and I just consistently take her. And so I'm like, well, what would make it more fun? And she's like, I wish I had more friends there. And I'm like, all right, that's an interesting piece. Maybe we go closer to home. Maybe we try to, recruit some of your friends to go, just because I think it's such a good skill set in terms of athletic development, because, we're always stuck in this standing kind of sagittal, frontal, transverse plane in terms of this. Now, all of a sudden, you're in a situation where it's not only like 3 axes, it's almost like 6 planes of motion, where now they're on their back, they're here, they're moving around, and all these different, it's right and left, there's no dominance. So just from an athletic problem solving, I really like it when I go watch, and their coaches are really good. So I keep telling Jamie, I'm like, if you want to develop athleticism, I think it's a really interesting piece to develop it. Because with basketball, when she plays, everything's so right-handed for her. And even though she's a lefty, she shoots and dribbles right. And and it's really strange. Like she's a total lefty, does everything, but yet she dribbles and shoots right. And she likes to play, but then again, I'm like, well, how come, so I have to go out and play with her. And I'm like, why don't you go out and shoot hoops on your own? She's like, I don't want to do it by myself. So now it's like, hey, do you want me to take you to, Hill Country Indoor? And she's like, well, then we got to call our friends and we got to do this. And this is one of the problems of not living in a neighborhood where, you got an outdoor shoot and the kids just kind of, yeah. So, that's one of the issues where, we didn't necessarily foresee not living in a neighborhood that like the kids just don't randomly come knock on the door to go play hoops like we did. Walking home from the bus, our house is right next to the bus stop, so we had this epic game of basketball that involved like 20 kids, just from the mere fact that everybody was walking by the house and like the basketball was out there, let's all play. So, but the jiu-jitsu thing is interesting in that it's really just I think very good in terms of problem solving. And that's kind of why, I mean, for her, I think it's a good piece. And, you know, Cash loves it, but I think he'd actually do better at wrestling. He just wants to do single and double leg takedowns. So he'll go to wrestling next year, which I think is an incredible developer as well. So,
Yeah.
you know, anything that like, and I know parents probably search the internet for this model of athletic development. And it really goes back to when people ask me, what do the kids enjoy and what are they going to want to do? Because if they enjoy it, they're going to do it and they're going to practice it and they're going to watch it and they're going to be obsessed with it. And that to me is the greatest form of mastery, when you enjoy doing something that doesn't feel like work. If you got to drag them out there and I got to open the garage and get out the basketball and shame you to go out there, that's not a good relationship for us, and it's not a good relationship for you to the sport.
Well, I think that hits on 2 points. Is number one, what we, not as a knock on you guys, but we have a program called the First Two Monkeys. And to us, it is, we know what it takes for you to get there in the long run. You know, that third monkey is fighting his way to get onto the boat versus the first two already know. They know what it takes. They have experience. They have leadership. They know. So for us, we are those first two monkeys, being able to mentor and to lead the kids. So sometimes that means that we have to take the reins. Like Raider doesn't like to stretch. I got it. What 11-year-old likes to stretch? There just aren't a lot of them. And so in that instance, I said, you know what? I will stretch you. I will help you stretch until you're ready to take that on yourself, until you're ready to own that yourself. And then
Raph, I didn't think you stretched. I thought you hated stretching. Didn't you tell me that you ever seen a cheetah stretch? I've never seen you stretch in my life.
I hate it, but I do it because I want to be a good role model.
Okay. I get it.
And number two is, to circle back around to the ASAP, is changing the athlete's idea of what is fun. Because this is a great story about Raider. Is the other day, his team is doing terrible. They're unfocused, boneheaded plays. Everybody's making mistakes. Everybody is off in la la land. And his coach just absolutely has fed up. You could see his boiling point go off the freaking roof. And he goes, that's it. Next air I see, we're doing burpees. And Raider's like, yes. And everybody looks at him and he's just like, I love burpees. And I was like, Raider, that's not a good thing. That normal people, that's a negative thing. And so for Raider to have a different viewpoint of what's fun for him, and that's the goal, is there's certain things of anything that you try to master, there's always going to be mundane. There's always going to be some things that you don't particularly like. And so being able to artificially self-apply pressure of saying, it could be something as simple as, you know what, Raider, you're throwing the ball against the wall and you did 12 in a row. Let's see if you can get 15 in a row. And next thing you know, just that little thing becomes fun to him. It's boring. He's out there by himself, blah, 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 blah. Next thing you know, he's like, okay, can you get 12 in a row? Can you get 12 in a row behind your back? Can you get 12 in a row, spider between your legs? And now all of a sudden it changes the way that they wire themselves, of being able to say, because Raider's the same way. He wants to do it with his friends. He wants to go hang out with his buddies and things like that, which is great. But sometimes we have to be one of those first two monkeys to be able to mentor him to say, okay, listen, I know that part is boring, but listen, give me 10 minutes of stretching and then you could go do 30 minutes of this awesome thing that you absolutely love, whatever it is. And just giving him that tool, teaching him how to kind of evaluate that himself and being able to make the best decision for his long-term goals.
That's an ideal action for parents. Yeah. Unfortunately, we see them not do that, be fat, point their finger at coaches for doing the wrong things, and etc. versus taking lead.
Yeah. No, it's a good deal. Is that good? Any other on the ridiculous questions? Got anything else?
I think the final fun one, Raph, favorite athlete of all time. I've heard stories of Dion, Sheffield, Wellborn. Who else you got in there that's a fun tale that you're... dude, I've witnessed the Antonio Tarver, probably a couple of my favorite with him. You would pair me with him to actually try... I don't know if you were helping me suffer or trying to get him to work harder, but doing some manual resisted armadillos. So holding this guy's knees as his elbows are jammed up against his knees and going through it, and he's wearing basketball shorts with a pocket, and probably $3,000 just cash falls out of this dude's pocket during an armadillo. And I'm looking at the cash, looking at Raph, looking at the door, but then followed through. It was like, excuse me, sir, you dropped your $3,000.
He wouldn't even have noticed.
I know.
He would have been like, hey, didn't I? My pockets are heavy. Let me get some more.
Yeah. But just, yeah, that was a fun time getting to Mason the Line Dixon, treating him to some manual resistance. Any other fun memories with some pros out there?
Oh God, I couldn't even. I think it would have to be more of a sitting back with a bottle of rum and just kind of reminiscing. And eventually, I think I would get to a point. I've been very blessed to work with some amazing athletes, and I've honestly have forgotten a lot of the little tidbit details throughout the years. I mean, just from everything from the military side to our Olympic development swimmers to our NFL or Major League Baseball. I mean, I think there's 1,000,001 different amazing stories, funny stories that I could literally sit around and talk about forever. I honestly don't have a single one that comes to the top of my head. I think it's I'm just absolutely grateful at everything I've been allowed to experience. I mean, I think back, one of the funniest things was that article they did on Ed Mulatalo at one of the local papers here. And there was this picture, and I don't know why it was so shocking to me, but there's a picture of, how big was Ed?
340, 6'2", 340 maybe.
Yeah, and there's a picture that shows up in the paper. The paper came over to do an article on us, and there's this picture of him cleaning, and he's got his bad wrist, and he's holding up probably easily 340 pounds, and then I'm in front of him, and I look like my little daughter. I mean, this tiny little guy sitting there, and it looks like I'm yelling at Big Ed, at 340-pound Samoan man with easily 500 pounds on the bar, who could just squash me in a fraction of a second. And I remember just how shocked I was at that picture. Like, God, is that really me? I was like, God, there's so little. It was crazy.
Did you know he's the head football coach at where is it? He's Southern Virginia University. He got named the head coach in 2018.
What?
Yeah, I didn't even know. Wow.
Man.
Yeah, I didn't know he was a head coach.
Last I heard, I thought he went back to Samoa.
Well, it says 2018. He's now the head football coach for this Southern Virginia University.
Wow. Because I went up there. I had dinner with Mitchell when I was in Carolina, and he said he had talked to, but that was a long time ago.
So he's presently still there. So that's pretty. I was just as you said his name. I hadn't caught up in him in so long that. But yeah, he was such a good dude. Yeah.
That you weren't there that time, but I remember when he took one of our other athletes. His girlfriend had ended up getting up. Remember the potbelly pig craze?
Yeah.
So everybody was buying these potbelly pigs because they wanted them as pets. Well, this guy, Jeff, his girlfriend buys this potbelly pig, and we used to tease her about it all the time. They used to come in and work out. Well, one day she comes in and she's bawling because this potbelly pig in her apartment, she had a pig in her apartment, had eaten through all of her cabinets and gorged on all the food. Apparently, these things like will chew through wood like a beaver. And I remember trying so hard not to laugh because she didn't know what to do with it because the apartment complex was going to make her get rid of it. So she was bawling. She was like, I got to get rid of this pig and I don't know what to do with it. Well, Ed goes, I'll take the pig. And I remember the moment he said that, I knew he had every intention of roasting that
Yeah, he was going to
thing.
eat it.
And he straight face told this girl, and he took this pig and he had a nice little luau with the pig. And I don't think to this day that she thought that this pig was going to a nice little farm in Sarasota.
Yeah.
In fact,
No, went right into the cookout. Yeah.
oh, that poor pig.
Yeah.
I bet it was delicious though.
I remember David Boston showing up and training with us. That's always a memorable one.
Yeah.
He like showed up with like these cat's eye contacts and like the dude, like just such a weird cat. And he looked like $1 million. Remember, he was like chest and abs and quads. I mean, dude looked great. All of a sudden, he can't even do our warm up. So he didn't have.
I don't remember. He was one of the first guys who took his shirt off before the workout even started.
Yeah.
Like most people go through the warm up and get sweaty and they go, God, it's hot. I was like, all right, guys, we're hitting the hurdles, and bam, the shirt came off. I was like, that dude is huge.
Oh yeah, he popped his shirt like as we were talking, getting ready to warm up. And I remember being like, his chest. I mean, the dude looked like a pro bodybuilder. I was like, God damn, this dude looks like a beast.
Yeah.
But he, like zero stability. I mean, it was really interesting. And I think at one point when we started doing like a bunch of the training, I think he even like pulled him out and we're like, hey, dude, you're going to get hurt. Like I remember like the knee wobble and just some of the things that were going on. Just because, I mean, the training that he jumped into was heavily evolved. The people had been there for years and was extremely advanced. I mean, he would have been better to have showed up a couple years before when it was less advanced. But it was very competitive and very demanding.
And even halfway through, he showed up halfway through the off season, so it wasn't. Jamie Duncan and Corey Chavis brought him.
Yep.
They were all boys, and he brought Boston with him. And I was like, "You sure you want to come in halfway through? I mean, these guys are. I mean, they're breathing fire at this point in time. They're getting after it."
Yeah, and the cat's eye contacts, he had like they were like red or some weird like contacts he had in. Like there was a lot of red flags.
And no shirt.
Yeah, and no shirt. I mean, but it looked good. Fucking chest and abs for days. I mean, what was he? 230-pound receiver, like, and fucking on like pro bodybuilder jacked, like looking like Jay Cutler and shit.
What was that other guy for the Jets? The D end. He was a phenomenal athlete as well. He was like a first round. He was a high pick. Boos.
Oh yeah. Oh, Dorian Boos.
Oh, dude, that dude was fun.
I think he died.
What?
Yeah. Yeah, pretty sure he passed away. November 22nd, 2016. Yeah, he passed away.
From what?
Man, I do not know what he died from, cause of death. Let's look at this one. So yeah, I remember, like periodically teammates and guys we played with, and I'll see like pop up and they died, and you're like, oh man. So he died by suicide at 42 and was later diagnosed with stage 3 chronic traumatic CTE.
Oh man.
So he killed himself. I think he was playing for the Edmonton Eskimos. Yeah.
At 42?
Yeah, died by suicide. Yeah, I played against him at Wazoo. Oh yeah, no, there's like periodically, like I'll see former teammates and guys I trained with, and this like pop up on the ticker is dying, and you're like, oh my god, like yeah, Dorian Boos.
Oh
yeah,
that's heartbreaking.
Well, I mean, we just texted the other day about Bill Stoltzing. I probably use that line at least once a week, where it's like, can't scare me with a good time. And, like the other one, which I always love about Bill Stoltzing, was our good friend who ended up passing away a number of years ago. He was on his way to meet Raph and I and got into a car accident and ended up dying. And we just thought he's flaked on us. And then we woke up the next morning. But The one thing I loved about Bill was he tried to squeeze so much life into one lifetime. He's like, man, I'm trying to live 4 lives in the span of one. There was never a moment where he was like, I'm just going to hang out and watch TV. Like, he was like on his boat and going here, and we'd see him I would see him in like 3 different places. Like, he would work out with us, we'd go get something to eat, and then I'd see him running, I'd see him there. I mean, like, it was unbelievable. He was like, it was like he had body doubles, and we'd see clones everywhere. I mean, it was unreal how much life that guy tried to pack into his day and taken too early from us. He was a great dude.
One of my biggest memories was the way that he approached. He was very well off. He had a lot of money, and he was never stingy about it. And it was crazy to me because he would be like, one day I was having this, it was a rough day, and you can tell that I'm having a rough day at work when I'm screaming at everybody. And I remember he came in at lunch and he was like, hey, he goes, go hang out at the house. He goes, you clearly need some time off. He goes, the keys to the boat are back there. And when I say the keys to the boat, it was like a 60-foot giant boat. And he's like, there's jet skis. He's like, and I remember, I go, you don't mind me taking the boat? He was like, whatever. He goes, what if I wreck it? He was like, yeah. He goes, if you enjoy it, he goes, it's more than worth it. And to me, that just hit. Like, he was never afraid to, like, here, take the keys to the car. Here, and it was, I never did because I didn't want to be responsible for a 60-foot boat. But the idea that he was so generous with his time, and it taught me a lot. Like, you know what? It's just money. It's, you can't the relationships that you build, the memories that you have, you just can't put a price tag on that. And that's what he was all about. He's like, whatever, it's just money. I'd rather spend some time with you. I'd rather you enjoy these things than just to sit there and worry about, the price tag and what's in the account.
Raph, if people want to learn more about what you're doing and the progression of Raider, where should they go and head to on the socials?
Oh, they can just go to Raiders page. We actually started out as our page, but we were putting so much content for Raider on there. So if you just go to Instagram and type in Raider, what is it? It's Raider _ and then his nickname is R8R. So Raider _ Ruiz. That's where we're putting a bunch of the content on there. And one of the things that we found over the years is a lot of people really want to know what we should be doing with our young rising stars. And for the most part, we're going to put the majority of our content in terms of exercises and tips and tricks and all of that good stuff. Where to find the program is going to be on that social media page. So anywhere on there, and it is moderated by Steph and I. So if you need to get a hold of either one of his parents, please feel free to follow those links.
And if you're in Tampa, Florida, we can find Ruiz at some beach somewhere and eating donuts afterwards.
And our new baseball training facility.
Awesome.
Nice.
Yeah.
Badass.
We got a new place that's opening up, Arsenal Baseball Softball Performance Center. So a couple of former big league guys said, hey, Raph, we love your ASAP, and we would like to integrate that into the full approach of skill acquisition from pitching, skill acquisition from fielding, skill acquisition from throwing, skill acquisition from hitting, and all that good stuff. So expect on social media to see a bunch of our new work out there that's really dialed into acquiring the skill of the perfect game.
Boom.
Killer.
Thanks again, Raph. That was awesome.
Yeah,
Great
dude.
time.
Thank you.
Hey, guys.
I'll see you.
Bye. This episode of Power Athlete Radio is powered by Train Heroic, the most immersive strength training app experience on the market.
We've built our online training business by partnering with Train Heroic and helping us deliver all of our world-class training programs like Jack Street, Field Strong, and Grindstone. To learn which Power Athlete training program best suits your goals, head to powerathletehq.com/training.
And if you're a coach looking to build a business with the best tech and training, go to trainheroic.co/powerathletehq.